Here we are live with this week's edition of the Letter Winners Show. It is myself, Eric Froton from NBC Sports Edge, as the lapel says, and my friend and colleague, the purveyor of the CFF site, Michael Bainbridge. We are here once again to give us some picks. As far as a quick roll call, last week 6-3. Year to date, we are 61-30, hitting at a 67% clip. We even went 8-0 in prize picks over the past 2 weeks. And I even think it's 12-0. I think we went 4-0 the week before that. So they're really teeing some pretty good player props lines up over on prize picks, which we certainly appreciate and profit on. So we will cut into the late injury news and impact. Chandler Morris likely starting for TCU with Max Duggan projected to be out against Baylor. And that also will dovetail with Zach Evans. Their top running back is considered very questionable, according to OC Doug Meacham. That means, once again, Kendre Miller very likely to start. He will get the overwhelming bulk of the carries over there. As far as on Purdue's side, very important game with Michigan State and Purdue. A lot of people like Purdue to pull the upset there. Payne Durham, very unlikely to play. And as everybody knows, if they're paying attention to Purdue's passing attack, he's been a very important part of that to kind of take the heat off of David Bell over there on the outside. Michael, any thoughts on those news bites?
Yeah, a lot of thoughts on all three of them. Duggan out, most likely. That means Chandler Morris would get the start. It's funny. Me and you, neither of us put Morris as our bargain bin play for the week. No. I think we're fading him for the most part in our DFS lineups. It's just so enticing, right? At that price point, it just allows you for so many options in your DFS lineups. And I use this comparison to last year when Brandon Peters was out for Illinois. And there was just this min-priced backup walk-on that could run a little bit, and everybody was jumping on him. I don't think he completed a forward pass that day. Probably, 8 to 9 fantasy points at 4,500, which is not good, obviously. So I try and restrain myself from rostering these guys in my DFS lineups, but Morris is a 4-star recruit, if I'm not mistaken. He can run. He was recruited by Oklahoma, for God's sake. So this is a guy that does have some talent. So it's going to be tempting to roster him. I think we have him projected at 17 fantasy points, which would pay off that 4,500 salary easily. So, I'm not going there, but maybe I'll sprinkle him in a couple lineups. I think that's what you should do with any multi-entry GPPs. I don't think Zach Evans is playing. I don't even think he's in town from what I was reading with the message board. So fire up Kendre Miller, both everywhere. He's cheap enough to do so, and he's a really talented back. Not saying he's at the Zach Evans level, but this is a guy that should get 15 to 20 carries. Now that Gary Patterson's out of town, we don't have to worry about a rotation in the backfield, hopefully. We get 20-plus carries for their best offensive player. And then Payne Durham out. David Bell, fire him up. We're firing him up, whether Payne Durham was in or out of the lineup. But maybe a bump up for someone like Milton Wright. Jackson Anthrop, I believe, had, 6 receptions, maybe something like that last week. He actually had 5 carries too last week. So another guy that you could possibly fit into your lineups.
Yeah. And if you're getting desperate, maybe TJ Sheffield, if you're really and if that's your proclivities, and especially with TCU, they're ranked 13th in terms of overall rushing performance. So this is a team that is very good at running the ball, even if they won't be throwing much. So that's something to certainly be aware of. Michael Pratt, trending towards playing. We'll see about that. He was in concussion protocol last week. Allegedly, there's been the rumblings that they think he's going to be cleared. Generally, when I hear that the staff thinks a guy's going to be cleared, I feel good about it, especially over there with Willie Fritz at Tulane. And this team needs him. I mean, let's be honest. They've been on quite a dumper for the past few weeks, Tulane, and the whole season in general, after starting pretty hot against Oklahoma. They gave Oklahoma all they could handle, and they proceeded to just go in the absolute tank. which speaks volumes about just how ineffective Spencer Rattler had been before Superman came in. Drake London is out for the year. Kyle Ford, the oft-injured Kyle Ford, double ACLs over the past couple of years. Even this year was still a little dinged up, but did look decent in limited reps. I mean, he fits that big wide receiver mold. He's 6'2", 220, and physical, where he brings a different element that Taj Washington and Gary Bryant, who's obviously a slot receiver, doesn't bring. It's going to be really interesting to see how he fits into the mold. And lastly, Connor Bazelak is out against Georgia, contributing to the 39.5 line against Georgia for Mizzou. That is a fucking bomb. I mean, oh my God. I mean, it's almost, you want to do it, but my God, it's such a high 40 points you got to get. My gosh, Mike, thoughts on those lines?
Well, I kind of wanted to turn it over to you because I know this is your area of expertise. These USC receivers without Drake London, which, man, I traded away JoJo Earl in a second-round pick for one of my competing dynasty teams for Drake London. Helped out for a couple weeks, but shame.
I love JoJo Earl, too. I do. Oh,
it's painful. But, you feel bad for the player, obviously. But what do you think happens with that USC rotation? Because we got a lot of questions this week as to who we want between Taj Washington and Gary Bryant Jr.
I am partial to Gary Bryant Jr. I just think in terms of talent, in terms of how in limited opportunities, he's proven to be an explosive player. I mean, obviously, Taj Washington has been playing the outside Z role that we saw Tyler Vaughns occupy for the past few seasons, pretty much have an iron grip upon it. And we saw even Brew McCoy do pretty well over there until he decided to go off the rails, of course. I just feel like Washington, even though he's a first-team All-American, freshman All-American last year, he's been good and he will get the reps, but he's been more of a technician on the outside. I like Gary Bryant Jr. a lot. I've got him in a couple dynasty leagues. I had him in the 50-teamer. I'm a fan, but also, with Kyle Ford too. I've had him in the Winning Edge League, which is a 20-team dynasty with 50-man rosters. I've had him for a while, and I've been holding on to him specifically because I love the talent coming out of high school. I mean, I love the physicality, and that's really on brand what we've seen from Drake London. Just bodying smaller cornerbacks, at 6'5", 225. And even though he doesn't quite have that same statuesque figure, his physique is legit. I mean, you look at Ford, and he's a physical guy. So, I really do like him. But if I had to go with one of Taj Washington or Gary Bryant, Bryant is Washington, I believe, is 41% owned on Fantrax. Bryant was only 12% coming in the waiver period. I mean, that's drastically under-owned.
It's name recognition.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, sincerely. And I mean, I just think with greater usage, you saw Amon-Ra St. Brown be very productive out of that slot role for the past couple of years, even though he moved to the outside for a little while last year. And it's obviously London ran that slot for 2 seasons too. I mean, it's a productive spot. And, with obviously USC, we're going to be seeing a lot of Jackson Dart today, possibly exclusively Jackson Dart. We don't know here, which is why we jumped on Keaton Slovis, 293.5 under as soon as those DraftKings lines came out. He was up for maybe 5 minutes, maybe. And we managed to stop him in.
That's your friend's fault.
Yeah, I know. That's my syndicate over there up in New Hampshire. But I really like the idea of Gary Bryant having a pretty explosive game. I think he's going to get a little bit of a showcase here. And they get him the ball in multiple ways. You see him get, he'll do the end arounds. He'll do the little, put him in motion, give him the jet sweeps. So I think they're going to get creative with him where it's Graham Harrell's show there on offense. So that's what I got. So we'll move on to the next set of news. Cal dealing with supposedly a major COVID outbreak, even though they're 99% vaccinated, I believe they said, in terms of the staff and the team. I wonder who the 1% is if they're over there living in San Francisco. You pretty much can't do anything or go anywhere unless you're vaccinated. So I would hope they all are. But even though we're not worried about the long-term, health consequences, we still don't have a lot in terms of who it is. There's a lot of conjecture involved there. I hope it ain't Garbers, so that's something you'll want to certainly take a look at with that evening slate for DFS purposes to see, who's in, who isn't. And certainly it opens up opportunities down the board on the cheaper side. If you have a couple of the more prominent receivers out, maybe, you start looking down the trough for some options there for the cheap $3,000 plays. Taysier Mack is out against Duke, and that's a prime time matchup for Pitt too. My God, Duke has been getting lit on fire every single week out there. Taysier Mack as a big play receiver, you see the intermediate routes, the short routes. Jordan Addison's just a wizard at those, but you've seen Mack lining up all over the formation, out wide and in the slot. He had a nice touchdown up the seam out of the slot last game where he broke it big. That's unfortunate. You can see obviously, Jaron Wayne, I think, is going to get a lot more action there. And Seth Hennigan, warming up for Memphis. That's the word on the street here that we're hearing. And that's a big deal because that flows downhill. Dykes, Calvin Austin Jr. You saw Calvin Austin Jr. was completely neutered with Peter Parrish under center, or actually I say in the gun. They don't line up under center over there at Memphis. But you saw him. He was just getting – everything was within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage. He was just getting swallowed up last game against Oh, no, it wasn't SMU. They're playing SMU today. But he just simply couldn't do anything. It will unlock Calvin Austin's playability. So any thoughts on those news bites, Michael?
Yeah, with Cal, I mean, in the 50-teamer, I took out Christopher Brooks. I just want to be safe. Like, I don't even know what the protocol is if we're going to find out. I don't know if they can even name them, the players, but I guess we'll find out during warm-ups as to who's warming up or not. But Cal beat reporters aren't really that prevalent on Twitter. So, I mean, I'd probably sit some of the Cal guys just to be safe. You don't want a goose egg. Taysier Mack out. Let's see, Jalen Barden is also out, so that kind of limits the target tree for Pitt. So fire up Jared Wayne, fire up Jordan Addison, Lucas Krull, the tight end, obviously. We want those guys in our lineups against this terrible Duke defense. Seth Hennigan, the entire Memphis situation is interesting because I believe we got word that starting running back Brandon Thomas is out as well. So Hennigan opens up the offense for Calvin Austin. Sean Dykes is super cheap at $4,300. I think I'm going to switch him into some of my DFS lineups if Hennigan is for sure in. And then in the backfield, I believe, I haven't looked into it because we just got late word on Thomas, but I believe it's going to be Marquavius Weaver probably getting the start. I'm not sure what his prices are, but that's somebody probably in the 3K, 4K range that you can easily get into your lineup. So Brandon Thomas being out is huge for both CFF and DFS.
Absolutely. In a game that predicts to be, an absolute shootout, especially if Hennigan's in and they can take a little pressure off that running game, which was definitely a problem last game. Take a look at Marquavius Dream Weaver in that other spot. I agree. I actually have him. I believe I have him in the the winning edge 20-team 50 roster one because I have Thomas and you got to back him up. And it ain't Rodriguez Clark. At least it hasn't looked that way. So he might be out too,
actually, Clark. So we might have all Marquavius Weaver in this.
Yeah, game. Honestly, you have to pay attention to that, especially with a main slate where you don't get a lot of G5 teams in those DraftKings main slates. Frankly, it's kind of a rarity, but this is a big game, so they have it listed. And we know that obviously SMU is not known for their defense. We saw that against Houston. Of course. Moving on to the sides, I am going with Baylor -7 over the aforementioned TCU. Obviously, you have that's a program in flux. You have Gary Patterson ousted. Doug Meacham, as the offensive coordinator, was there from 2014 to 2016 when they had some of their halcyon days in terms of scoring points. But that has certainly been a lot more difficult this year with Max Duggan, who, while he runs pretty well, not the most accurate, had a hard time kind of spreading the ball around. Quentin Johnson hasn't quite been as dominant as he had sort of let on he could be this season. Mike reminds me of that since I loved him in the offseason for CFF purposes. And with Baylor, they have the number one rushing offense in the entire country when it comes to overall team performance. And I believe they're still top 20 in terms of passing behind Gary Bohannon. Come on, Gary. But I just think in that spot, there's so much adversity against TCU. Playing a backup quarterback, very inexperienced. It's kind of surprising that Will Howard got ousted after starting all last season. But as you mentioned, Morris, Oklahoma transfer, and with Zach Evans basically in full-on malcontent mode, who knows what you're getting out of that. So I just think there's so much uncertainty surrounding TCU. I got to go with Baylor. And then my other play, North Texas -5.5 over Southern Miss. Southern Miss is in, you want to talk about disarray. I mean, they make TCU look like Alabama. You know what I mean? When it comes to Southern Miss. Last game against Middle Tennessee, where they had Chase Cunningham knocked out, who's now out for the season. I didn't put it in there because it's a little bit down the board, but he's out for the year now. And Southern Miss had 3 touchdowns against them. Either 2 are fumble recoveries. 1 was a blocked punt for a touchdown. This is an offense that cannot move the ball. 23 points over their last 3 games. North Texas has really kind of come up since replacing Jace Ruder with Austin Owen, who was last year's predominantly their starter. 86 points over the past 3 games. They've proven they can score. Obviously not a great defense, one of the worst in terms of giving up explosive plays. But against Southern Miss, they're down to their 3rd quarterback, who's a true freshman starter. They've proved completely inept. One thing that North Texas does do is they're pretty good against the run in terms of on a success rate basis, stuff rate. So that's all they can pretty much do with Southern Miss. That's a really bad matchup. I think it's going to be a kill spot. Mike, your side.
Yeah, North Texas has turned around because they stopped throwing the football, right? They got the DeAndre Torrey in the backfield. I forget the running back 2 there. He's hard to pronounce name,
yep.
But
and that's with Attaway out too. Yeah. It doesn't even matter. They're just churning them out.
Sure. They're just feeding them carries and stop throwing the football. That's how North Texas has been succeeding of late. So I am going Purdue +3. They say not to make emotional bets. This is an emotional bet. Michigan State is losing this weekend. Okay, they should have lost last weekend. I'm still baffled. Well, one, I'm baffled by 5 touchdowns from Kenneth Walker. One guy is beating you. How does Michigan and their defensive staff allow that to happen? You can see I'm just amped up right now because I'm pissed off over last week's result. But even the sack fumble, where they called it a sack fumble, but then reversed it because his shin was down. No, it was not. Okay, I don't know how they reversed that call. Changed the whole dynamic of the game, but I digress. Purdue has a defense this year, okay? They are 10th in yards allowed per game through the air, 4th in pass success rate, 23rd in run play success rate. They can play defense. They're chucking. We know a Jeff Brom offense. They chuck it 40 times a game because they don't have a running game, but that's fine against the worst pass defense in the Big Ten in Michigan State. I thought that those numbers were kind of skewed just because they had so many leads at the start of the year, so teams were just coming back with the pass. But you allow 400 passing yards to Cade McNamara, your pass defense sucks. Okay, Purdue's winning this game. So if you want to do +3, if you want to do money line, take them both.
I love it. Salty Bainbridge here with the backwards Michigan hat. Got to appreciate that. And actually, just going with a little bit of the props, DraftKings, they opened up King Doru at 49.5 yesterday. And we both tossed him into a couple of our parlays right out of the gate. It was like, oh my God, okay, we have to get this in. He's since dropped immediately down to 40.5. You got Xander Horvath back, who in a big game is probably going to have a much more increased role. They worked him in last week, but I don't think you're going to see 17 carries out of King Doru. Probably going to be lucky to get double digits, and I can't see that being 49.5, especially to pass out the offense. So just a little anecdote there. Early bird gets the worm on the DFK props. DraftKings DFS on the main slate, core 2 plays. I'm going with Trey Sigers in the aforementioned SMU game. Sigers, he's had 6 touchdowns over the course of his past 4 games. In the other 5th game, he had 110 yards rushing. He's been clearly the best guy there. And, as if you need any more reason, Ulysses S. Bentley on the $50 bill was listed as being a full go last week. What does he do? Obviously, he twists his ankle, right ankle, out for the rest of the game. Questionable to play this week. I mean, I don't think there's not really a lot of news coming out of there. You can't trust it, in my opinion. I just don't think you can. $6,100 is a pretty damn reasonable price considering the main slate right now. Sigers had 2 touchdowns last game. One of them came in the air. He's built a lot more stoutly than Bentley, who's more of got that thinner frame. I just think he's going to get a heavy workload today against Memphis, 6,100. And then Ja'Cour Pearson, $4,900. We talked about him a little bit, and just the overall arching theme of Ole Miss, just an absolute mash unit out there in their wide receiver core. All 3 of their top wide receivers heading into the season are out. I mean, Dontario Drummond, we haven't gotten really an update, but on Monday, Lane Kiffin said if the game was today, he wouldn't play. I can't see that happening. And if he does, it's a hamstring injury. That's not something you're really going to be stretching the field on. Maybe he's a decoy. But Ja'Cour Pearson, I'm going with $4,900. Michael, your core 2.
Yeah, Kai Thomas at 5,000 on DraftKings. I'm really confused by the separation of the salaries or disparity of the salaries between him and Marquise Irving. I don't know why there's a $1,300 separation between the two, because they're essentially splitting snaps and carries. So I don't like, our projections are near even between these two guys. So maybe you can look at Marquise Irving as the better GPP play between the two, because nobody's spending up to that when they can just spend 5,000 on Kai Thomas. So, both of these running backs have topped 1,000 yards, 100 yards the last 2 weeks. And Illinois is 96th in rush success rate defensively this year. I mean, Tanner Morgan's only throwing 15 passes a game the last 2 weeks. So it's just ground and pound with this Minnesota offense. They got a really dominant run blocking offensive line. So I think it's just a safe bet at 5,000 that you're at least getting 75 yards and a touchdown. Just plug it into your lineup. Second one, you've covered it on the Baylor side, but Abram Smith, he's really, over the course of the last few weeks, really started to take over the lion's share of the carries in that backfield over Treston Ebner, which I also kind of like this week at 4,100.
He's pretty cheap. Yeah, he's cheap
really
this week.
Cheap. TCU, just as bad as Missouri against the run. They've allowed the second most fantasy points to opposing running backs this year. So, fire up the Baylor running backs this week. I think Smith is obviously the best of the 2 options, but I have no issue plugging in Ebner in my lineups either.
I think they both score against TCU's 113th ranked defense when it comes to overall performance. That is freaking brutal. The bargain bin on the main slate. I'm going with the big red dog himself, Sean Clifford, Penn State, 6,000. I mean, in this slate, that is really way down there in terms of the quarterback pricing. Obviously, he threw for 360 yards against Ohio State last week because he has to. Looked healthy, and that was really a question since he got banged up against Illinois, against Maryland's defense that has been absolutely pitiful across the board when it comes to their pass defense. I like Clifford, and also if you want to look into maybe Parker Washington, Keandre Lambert-Smith, I think they all kind of eat today. I think it's going to be a feast. Penn State's lost their 3 games. They're going to look to kill Maryland. They're not going to be holding off for any reason. And then Jordan Curley, SMU, I have him in a couple of dynasty leagues. Really like him for his explosive playability. He's hitting big bombs at $3,600 down the slate. There aren't a lot of really great plays down there in the under sub 4,000 range this week, especially in the wide receiver core. He scored in 4 of the last 5 games. I see them throwing a lot, obviously, against Memphis. He might have to keep pace. And he comes in and spells Reggie Roberson and probably getting about 20 to 25 snaps a game. I think he could catch a couple passes and a touchdown since he is their big play guy on that outside. They bring him in when he's fresh, and they just toast defensive backs that are kind of on the low side, that are kind of a little bit worn down. Pretty good scheme in there by Sonny Dykes. Mike.
Yeah, John Rice Plumlee. I will say this. He is out of my player pool if we get word that Dontario Drummond is playing and starting. Okay, I won't start John Rice Plumlee if that's the case. I don't think any of the starting 3 receivers for Ole Miss are playing this week. It sounds as though they have a specific plan for Plumlee this week per the coaching staff and some of the beat writers. So I like them. I like for this offensive coaching staff to get him involved, whether it's catching the football, running it, maybe even throwing a couple passes with Corral dinged up. Min price. I mean, he played 47 snaps last week with 4 targets. So if he gets that kind of workload this week, I think he can pay off that 3,200 salary. Kenny McIntosh, the running back 3 for Georgia. Again, it's Missouri defense, the worst rush defense in the country. It's gonna be a blowout. I'm hoping that they just run roughshod in the first quarter and then just get Kenny McIntosh in the late in the first half, second half. All we need is 10 carries and a touchdown. I think he can easily pay off that salary as well.
I agree. Absolutely. Kenny McIntosh is a good look, and Bryce Plumlee as well. Core 2 plays for the evening. I'm going with Hendon Hooker. Man, this is a tough quarterback slate on DKs. I mean, just looking up and down the board, trying to find something outside of Bryce Young to really sink your teeth into. It's hard to really get into Malik Cunningham against a Clemson defense. It shut everybody down. I mean, scoring is another matter, but the defense has been, you can't really fade them at all. So I'm going with Hendon Hooker here, Tennessee. We saw Kentucky, obviously started out 6-0, got run over by Georgia, and then last week got thrown all over by Will Rogers, who just carved them up for Mississippi State. Hendon Hooker has proved he can do it in the air and on the ground. I like Tillman as well as a wide receiver, especially on FanDuel. He's super cheap on FanDuel. I believe he's like $6,100.
We're riding together on that one.
Right.
We're riding together on that one today, Tillman.
We're on Cedric the Entertainer, Tillman, absolutely. So I like Tennessee in general there. And then Fresno State, Jalen Cropper, I don't know if you guys watched it, but he had a very uncomfortable looking knee twist last game where, God, he felt, it looked like he went on the sidelines, and they have these banners, these like triangular banners they have on the side everywhere that are like foam and slide. I don't know what the hell they're doing. Like, what are you doing? People are going right out of bounds. It's right out of bounds. And he slipped on that thing, and it didn't look good. He came out of the game. He's questionable. We haven't really gotten anything from Kalen DeBoer over there in Fresno State. I'm concerned about how effective he will be if he even does play here in a big game against Boise State where they're going to have to throw. So I'm going to say Josh Kelly, $5,600. He's for my money and what I've seen, I feel like he's been the most explosive receiver. Wheatfall has had his moments too. They're both pretty close in terms of price. If you have a preference, all right, I'm down with that as well. But I'm going to go with Josh Kelly. Mike, your play.
Yeah, Wan'Dale Robinson for Kentucky. 42% of the team target share. I don't know what the rankings are nationally, but I'd have to assume that's in the top 5, if not number 1 amongst receivers. He's got 30 targets in the last 2 games alone, right? And one of those was Georgia. Okay. So they have no other receivers. So obviously Will Levis is looking Robinson's way. I think 6,900 is a nice price. So just file him away and lock him in your lineups because he's getting that target share, PPR settings with DraftKings. So I think that's a really good play there. And then Jake Haener for Fresno State. To piggyback off yours, I do think that Jalen Cropper is going to play today. I still like Josh Kelly, as you mentioned, just because we don't know how healthy Cropper will be, but I do think he'll be a go. But they'll have their full complement of playmakers. Ronnie Rivers is expected to be back. Jordan Mims has obviously shown very capable in Rivers' place. Full complement of receivers. So I think Jake Haener at that price, really safe play that just is a benchmark in your lineups.
Sure, sounds good. We'll move on to the bargain bin for the evening. I have Sam Laporta-Potty, Iowa, $3,800. He's proven to be, at least the important safety valve because we're not going to get much downfield out of Spencer Petras. In terms of his performance, 4 out of the last 6 games, he's had double-digit fantasy points. And when you're talking about under 4,000 in a repressed slate, anytime you're dealing with that evening slate, it's, I believe 8 games, and you just have far less options really to sift through, especially in the lower side. And then Byron Cardwell for Oregon, 4-star, highly touted prospect, true freshman. Him and Seven McGee came in there together, but Cardwell is the more stoutly built back, kind of more of the CJ Verdell role who's been out. And he's provided to be a nice little counterbalance to Dye, who obviously is pretty good when it comes to getting an open space, but he leaves a little to be desired between the tackles. He's more of the thumper. I think you'll see him in a short yardage situation. He had over 100 yards and a touchdown last game. And with Oregon playing, a fairly soft front when it comes to rushing against Washington, they're not going to throw on that secondary, which is one of the best in the entire in all of college. I mean, that's an excellent secondary for Washington. I see a heavy ground attack coming. And with Cardwell being the number 2 running back behind Dye, I think he's going to get possibly 10 touches. And if he does, that's worth the minimum price. Mike, you.
Yeah, I'll mow through these pretty quick. Andrel Anthony for Michigan didn't have a single catch coming into last week. The East Lansing native just went off with 155 receiving yards, 6 catches. I think he continues that this week. It's always a risky proposition with Michigan receivers just because they spread the ball around so much. But Indiana's a pretty good run defense, so I don't think Michigan can just ground and pound their way to a win. They'll have to throw it some. So I like Andrel Anthony this week. Not really a bargain bin at 4,900, but it's cheap enough where you can plug him in easily into your lineup. And then Marcus Washington for Texas. I don't know what Joshua Moore is doing. He is not a star athlete. He should not be mouthing off to Steve Sarkisian in practice. He's had fumbles and drops. But Marcus Washington should be the beneficiary of that. He had 9 targets last week. It's going to be him and Xavier Worthy if Joshua Moore is out.
Sounds good. We'll move on to our prize picks. If you want to get in the action, like I said, we're 12-0 over the past 3 weeks and our prize picks plays. You want to put in the promo code BETSPURTS when you get over there and go out and win some money. So we'll go on to my play. Kendre Miller, we talked about TCU a little bit. I don't have to really belabor the point too much. He's at 63.5 yards. That looks like a stale line to me. If he's getting 15 to 20 carries, which I think he's been crushing that number on a weekly basis. And with no Zach Evans to mess with him, as mentioned, Baylor, good in terms of their pass defense, run defense, 64th in the country. They leave a lot to be desired there. And as mentioned, TCU ranked 13th in terms of their overall rushing performance, according to CFB Winning Edge. Next, I'm going to go with Trey Sigers. As we mentioned, 4 straight games, 6 touchdowns in those games. He's had a touchdown, 0.5 touchdowns. I'm taking the over since the UCSS Bentley is not going to be there in all likelihood to be taking any of those snaps away from him. Even so, he's the more stoutly built back who's going to be handling those big-time reps around the goal line. I'm going with Trey Sigers. That's a simple one in terms of 0.5 touchdowns. He's getting in the end zone. Michael.
We're riding together a lot this week because I am also in on the Trey Sigers over there. Toski Dove, if you want to do the melody with Dove Fly, whatever.
This is what it sounds like when Towski Dove cries. Right, here we go.
Georgia allowed 6 touchdowns all season long. Missouri is starting a true freshman or a backup. I know they're starting QBs out this week. I just don't see this happening. He's 3rd on the team in targets, so he's not even a focal point in that passing offense. I think this one is an easy under. And then Brad Roberts, I don't know what Prize Picks is doing here, to be honest. It's recency bias. I know he's shut down against San Diego State, but he hit that over every single week leading up to the last time out. So expect him. He's 3rd in the country in rushing volume. He gets the ball all game long. So I see him hitting that over.
All game long. Great. Two 80s crooners there. And I'm going to leave it with just this. Michael and I both hopped on Will Rogers, 309.5 passing yards. DK put him up really quickly at 315.5, and he came down, crashing down within 5 minutes. I'm telling you, DK has been, if you're going to be betting these props, you have to be there, ready, finger on the trigger as soon as these come out, because they've been much more responsive. This is the fastest I've seen them adjust lines was this week. They're smartening up, even though it doesn't matter. They're still putting up some horrible lines. FanDuel, Will Rogers, 309.5. That is gold. He's hit that 5 of the last 6 games, and the only game he didn't was freaking Alabama. You can throw that out the window. He still threw for 300 against Alabama in a game where they got absolutely blown out. He's going over 309.5. Grab that free money, everybody. that is going to do it today for the Letter Winners podcast. I, Eric Froton, NBC Sports Edge, my friend Michael Bainbridge, purveyor of the CFF site. Jump on that CFFF site Discord. It is the best thing on the internet in terms of getting up-to-date information and not just information, but like good chat. Everybody in there is a diehard in terms of things that I feel like I miss. So, I mean, it's an incredible resource. Highly, highly recommended to check out that. Thank you very much for listening to another Letter Winners podcast.